Hello, my good people. Welcome back to The People's Basics. I'm John Munitz, and we're here for another live stream. Today is March 3rd, and we're doing another episode covering the New York City candidates. Today, I think we're featuring a very interesting candidate. I think he has one of the highest amount of experience if we are going across the board, but his is very different than some of the ones we've reviewed in the past couple of episodes. His is a lot more national experience. And the person I'm talking about in today's episode is Shaun Donovan. He is the former Secretary of Education under Barack Obama. In his, I believe, the beginning of his term, his first term, he was serving under him. And so he is a very interesting candidate. His top priorities are really housing and education, as you'll see as we go along. And I just want to remind people of how we do these live streams. I'm going to be taking any of your comments or questions along the way, and I'm going to be breaking it down each time we get at the end of one of the policy pages or the About Us page. So I'll take any of your questions, get them in early if you want them to be addressed first. But without any further ado, let's get into our episode about Shaun Donovan, a candidate for New York City's mayoral race in 2021. Okay, so the first page we always review is the About Us page. We want to know how these people want to sell themselves, the narrative that they want to drive before we get into any of the policies, because you'll notice when people have actual policy pages and want to be serious candidates, they generally try to address the same priorities. They might have certain little details in policies, depending on how much detail they're willing to provide. And Shaun actually is one of the candidates with a lot of policy, so this might take a lot of time. So we might just go more of the headline stuff because he does a good job in providing a lot of detail. So I want to give kudos there. But let's get to the About Us page first. So meet Shaun. He says he's a lifelong New Yorker. Shaun Donovan served as a member of Barack Obama's cabinet, where he developed a close partnership with President Obama and was trusted by him and Joe Biden to take on some of the biggest challenges facing our country. As New York City mayor, Donovan will again work in partnership with President-elect Biden, ensuring that New York City's voice is heard in the White House and that New York's needs are met. Shaun Donovan believes that your zip code should not predict your chances for success of how long you live. As a nationally respected affordable housing expert, he knows it is critical for families to live in fair, safe, and affordable housing, and that every neighborhood has equal access to the jobs, opportunities, and benefits that New York City has to offer. Shaun is a proven leader and manager. As Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in the Obama cabinet, I was wrong. I said education before. It's HUD. I knew it was under Obama, but yes, he was HUD under it. Who's education? Oh, that was Arne Duncan. Arne Duncan was education. So yeah, I got that flipped. But he was HUD. So as HUD for Obama, Shaun led the nation out of the Great Recession's housing crisis and reduced veterans' homelessness by 50%. And he successfully managed the $4 trillion federal budget as director of the Office of Management and Budget during the Obama/Biden administration. So I guess he served in multiple roles in the Obama administration. This probably was the second term, and this was the role that Neera Tanden just got shot down for those that are wondering. It is a very important job. It's basically managing the president's version of what they want as the budget. So let's keep going. He says from January 2009 to July 2014, Shaun was the 15th Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, where he led the fight against the nation's unprecedented foreclosure crisis. Boy, it fell very short, Shaun. I mean, I'm sure you didn't have full authority to do everything. Like, you still needed Congress to do some stuff. But boy, yeah, we did not do a great job in preventing homelessness during that crash. If anything, a lot of the bankers got off scot-free during that crisis, and a lot of other people, lost a house and their livelihood. That's why inequality rose under the Obama administration. Despite the economic recovery, inequality rose. So next, under his leadership, HUD helped families rent or buy affordable homes, revitalized distressed communities, fought discrimination, and dramatically reduced homelessness. After Hurricane Sandy hit his hometown, President Obama asked him to lead the Hurricane Sandy Rebuilding Task Force. leaving a stronger, more resilient region than before the storm hit. Yeah, I mean, some parts, sure. It's not like fully recovered. It took a lot of, frankly, local administration to be doing the rebuild too. We did not a lot of great help from the federal government. I don't know. There's a reason he doesn't bring up like specific projects or anything. It's kind of like the general terms. Shaun served in President Obama's cabinet for his full 8 years in office. In July 2014, he's sworn in as the 40th director of the U.S. Office of Management and Budget at OMB. Shaun increased investment in key domestic and national security priorities that grew the economy, protected our country, and increased opportunity. And he oversaw regulations that reduced inequality, expanded healthcare, improved education, and fought climate change. While OMB director, Shaun played a pivotal role in managing the nation's response to the Ebola and Zika outbreaks. Prior to joining the Obama administration, Donovan served as commissioner of the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development under Mayor Bloomberg, where he led the most aggressive affordable housing program in the nation. He also served in the Clinton administration as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Multifamily Housing at HUD and as acting FHA Commissioner. Yeah, I mean, like when we're talking experience of candidates, Shaun Donovan is up there in terms of who has a lot of like actual political experience for sure. Your judgments of those administrations you may take as your own merit, how valuable that experience is, but he certainly has been around the block, both on the federal and even on the local level. But I think the federal is the higher thing that he's trying to amplify here. Like his big push, clearly, when you saw the big beginning part, was I'm the guy who's going to bring in the federal connections and dollars. That's who I can bring in. It's a similar appeal that Yang is trying to make with his connections to certain senators and Biden and Kamala. So there's certain candidates who are like, hey, my federal experience is actually valuable for us to get the money that we're going to need during this budgetary crisis. But let's keep going on with Shaun's page. Next, he says, deeply affected by the crisis he saw around him growing up, he volunteered in a homeless shelter during college and interned for the National Coalition for the Homeless when he graduated. After studying housing in graduate school, he returned to work for the nonprofit Community Preservation Corporation in the Bronx and across New York City. So, I mean, yeah, it's a very nice to do that volunteer work. I do similar volunteer work myself, so I can appreciate him doing that effort. Donovan holds a BA and a master's degree in public administration and architecture from Harvard University. Shaun was born and grew up in New York City and is married to Lisa Gilbert, a landscape architect who has designed and restored parks in New York City and across the country. Shaun and Lisa live in Brooklyn, where they raised their sons Milo and Lucas. Yeah, I mean, well-educated guy. His wife also works in basically something that's kind of similar to like city planning in a way. Landscape architecture kind of has a similar dynamic. Like in that effort of like restoring parks, it can be involved in public service too. So that's the end of his page. Please let me know if you have any questions on this. But basically, he's trying to say he's a well-educated guy. His main things have been, public education, as well as, frankly, housing and, public housing and just housing in general. And that he has experience on a federal and a local level and the connections that need to be done. I think he certainly is the most experienced candidate, in my opinion, in the field. I would say there are others that might have a little bit more New York City local experience, but he, in my opinion, is the most experienced, like politically, candidate in the field. But let me go check now, see how any of the comments have been going, and if we have any questions so far. None so far. Usually that makes sense. Beginning parts aren't a big deal. Let's get into the top priorities, though. Let's get into the actual meat and potatoes, the policy platform. So, as I said, Shaun has a pretty extensive policy platform, but his main focuses as top-line buckets are education, climate, housing, transportation, health, criminal justice, economic development, aging, innovation, and racial equity. I think that this is a pretty solid general list. The one thing I would say that is needed here is maybe like turning one of these into like a public safety plan. Like when you look at what the voters' top priorities are in New York City, often you get number one is how you respond to the COVID pandemic, which he has here. He has health. Next, the second thing usually that you're seeing on voters' minds is the economy, which he has here. Economic development, innovations, probably part of that. A lot of these things are intersectional and will touch the economy as well. I'm sure climate, education, transportation, many of these things will do that. Then the third thing that usually comes up on voters' minds during this election cycle has been, well, public safety. There has been a rise in violent crime and just crime in general in New York City, partially related to, frankly, the economy and, crimes of desperation. That's one part. But there is a rise in hate crimes. There is a rise in gun crimes that have been going on in New York City. There has been, frankly, a rise in mental health issues, again, because of how we've been handling somewhat of this pandemic, but there's been some lingering problems in general. So I think public safety is that, next bucket that candidates really got to address. And then after that, you get into kind of a lot of issues that are kind of like in that 1 to 5% range as like top issues for people. And it gets into like, again, he's got a lot of these here, but I just think he's missing out on calling that out. Maybe he has that included in the criminal justice, but like, I think a lot of the times, if you're just getting people who are going to skim, you want to have it as a top line thing. Like we saw like Ray McGuire yesterday when we analyzed his platform, he had it as a top line thing. And I think he was smart for doing that. But let's go through some of the ones that we have here. So I think the ones that we want to hear first will be education. I want to see if he puts it at the top, that means it's his first one he either published or it's the most recent one. There's the case one way or another for Russ to just go for it. And as I said, education's been one of his top priorities. Okay. So, a million strong, repairing, rebuilding, and reimagining New York City public schools for all our kids. The dual pandemics of COVID-19 and ongoing systematic racism expose deep-rooted injustices in New York City's education systems that have also highlighted the strength and resilience of families, students, and educators to innovate and persevere through unprecedented times. As we work to recover from COVID-19, we must rebuild and reimagine our educational system, tackling the long-standing inequities to create real pathways to economic opportunity for all public school students, valuing New York City's diversity by creating integrated and inclusive opportunities for all students, and carefully rebuilding trust and partnering with families and educators to reimagine together. To do so will require us to draw not just on the traditional resources of our public schools, but on all of New York City's enormous assets, bringing all sectors to the table to support our children's future, challenging our business leaders to help our students and schools recover, and define the needs of the future economy and ensure equitable access to relevant apprenticeships, jobs, and internships that put every student on track to a family-sustaining job. Better utilizing our cultural resources, our arts, our museums, our libraries, our parks to enhance and extend the educational opportunities of our students, families, and educators, and improving coordinations with nonprofits and community-based organizations that can better engage historically underserved communities and nimbly address short-term recovery needs and long-term capacity challenges. So, let me see. Okay, let me finish off this is his thesis before he gets into the plans. Prior to the pandemic, the public high school graduation rate in New York approached a historic 80%. And yet, substantial gaps still existed, with students from low-income households, students of color, multilingual students, students in temporary housing, and students with disabilities too often left behind. At the college level, the CUNY system is a jewel that will be essential to New York City's recovery, and that has rightfully received national recognition for its groundbreaking work to improve completion rates. But there is work to be done to scale CUNY's effective programs, improve completion rates, and set up students for career success at both the high school and college level. Opportunity gaps mean that students from low income households and students of color complete their educations at lower than average rates and are less likely to enter family sustaining careers. We must have the vision to reimagine an educational system that values and supports the remarkable diversity of New York City's students, families, and educators, providing every student equitable access to critical resources and support structures they deserve. We must provide meaningful pathways within and beyond the classroom, birth through career, that open doors to economic opportunity. We must close long-standing resource and outcome gaps, providing safe, engaging, culturally responsive, and inclusive learning environments. Draw from both the innovations of New York City's educators and existing evidence about what works, and prepare all of our city students for family-sustaining jobs for decades to come. And we must have the focus to carry that vision through and make it real. So, let's go through some of the top line things that he's really trying to include in here. So one, he wants there to be equity in education, that we have a system that, says, hey, there are gaps currently that we need to address. And so let's pump resources into those areas that are currently being underserved. That makes a lot of sense. I think we need to be making sure that everyone is getting a kind of baseline standard of funding in education, and that we have a system that currently doesn't do that. Property taxes really make a really skewed education system that creates economic traps for communities that are basically becoming more and more ravaged by poverty, because the property values in those areas aren't as high usually. So property taxes don't raise as much funding, which provides worse education. So I think that makes a lot of sense. So equity in education makes sense. The second thing is he emphasizes how we have to get these different private groups connected with our education system. So employers making sure that they're connected with students, and making sure that nonprofits are helping address some of the students that might have gaps from this kind of COVID period of non-in-person schooling. As well as just in general how you handle long-term capacity. So that's another thing he wants to try and get more partnerships in. And the last thing is really, well, no, there's two more things. So then the next thing is really how he wants to try and use public spaces more as opportunities for educational experiences for our school system, and using that capacity for them. And then, he wants to do kind of a cradle to grave approach. So he wants to try and extend it to probably mean like we have more free CUNY, and then we have pre-K that extends beyond, I think it's just at age 4 right now, but extending it to birth, basically, cradle to career. So his plans, he says, he actually breaks it down right here. So he wants to rebuild and reimagine, repair the systemic damage from COVID while tackling pre-existing inequities to better serve all students. Yeah. So this is, again, especially since COVID has impacted, communities of color, especially because they often have less wealth in those communities. And so they have less access to some basic services, like in the healthcare community. There are a variety of reasons why that has occurred. But yes, we want to make sure that those communities are being best served. Next, leverage New York City's diversity as an asset. Apply a system-wide focus on diversity, integration, and inclusion for students and educators. Want to hear more about what that means specifically? Reimagine pathways from birth through post-secondary education that open doors to economic opportunity. So that's the cradle to career approach. And then invest in New York City libraries as neighborhood learning assets. Okay. So he's basically saying all the same things we had summarized, but he really leans in on the diversity aspect as a main thing he wants to focus on. Rebuild and reimagine. So Yep, this says what we were saying before, but what is the specific policy? So, rebuild trust with families and communities, establish stronger formal systems to facilitate family and student input in school and district priorities. Okay, so it's not a specific solution, it's more a resolution to try and figure out what those systems are, and you want to have it be community led. That's fine. Next, all channels for ongoing family and community engagement must be in the languages spoken by families and must use multiple modes of communication: phone, online / virtual, in person, small focus groups, and larger community meetings. Okay. Yeah, so this is just an access thing. Like, not everyone is going to be able to go for an in-person meeting sometimes. Not everyone is going to be able to do virtual because we don't have broadband everywhere. Like, we should have every meeting be in a variety of formats for people to be able to attend. But I'd be curious to know how he would address something like, um, well, I mean, a lot of these are like in person. Like, in person, small focus groups are still kind of in person. Larger community meetings are still kind of in person. So, like, you have 3 in-person options, and I wonder how you handle that in, like, a pandemic. Because, like, then the other options are phone and online/virtual. So does this mean that just every meeting is phone/online/virtual? And then that begs the question, like, how much language access do you provide? What do you do for people who are deaf? Like, is there different things? Like, obviously, there's so many different things. I think this is a good thing. It's just like, I don't feel like this does enough to fully achieve that access goal that he's thinking of. Um, Next, respect and empower educators. So we will start a new competitive fellowship program recognizing a diverse group of innovative teachers, principals, and counselors. Okay, sure. Fellows will be released from some duties for a year to work at the Central Department of Education, conduct outreach to colleagues, and provide formal input into policy priorities for the chancellor and leadership team. This makes a lot of sense to me. This is taking, yeah, like as he just said, taking a federal model and making it into a local practice. You basically say, hey, who are our best teachers? Who are doing some things right? Okay, let's try and unload some of the normal administrative burdens from these people and let them help give some guidance to some teachers around our whole city, by informing our Department of Education on practices that would be really helpful. Um, I think that's a great idea. Is kind of really, it's almost like hiring from within. And I think we need more teachers compared to just like administrators, uh, designing how we do policy in administration. So yeah, I think that's a good idea. Next, we have, in addition, we must identify, recognize, and scale the innovative practices and materials of our best educators and provide expanded options for teacher leadership pathways that allow our best educators to keep working with students in the classroom while taking on additional leadership opportunity. Yeah, so this is again just kind of like freeing up teachers' time so that they can try out other initiatives to help out. Um, it's very vague again, this one, but it's nice priority. It'd be nice if we could provide some freedom for teachers to focus on teaching and making sure kids are getting what they need. COVID-19 is exacerbating. Okay, so let's see. Widening opportunity gap. We're only really going through the headline, what he's like highlighting here. So they want to invest in mental health services, response to trauma, and other supports, both within and beyond school premises, building on the city's previous investment in counselors and support staff, as advocates and the city council have called for. Okay. Yeah, this is okay. So let me actually read the rest because this gives me the detail that I want. So, healthcare for students and families in and out of the school so that they receive coordinated mental health services needed, especially if they are in crisis rather than relying on 911. Additionally, all educators should receive mental health and self care support for themselves, alongside mental health and social emotional learning training to better address their students' needs in the classroom. I think that's great. So basically, this is having a response system that is separated from 911 to handle mental health responses. And then on top of that, it's basically saying that we should have our educators get some level of support and, have, mental health professionals be able to provide them counseling, as well as giving them training to know when their students might need some help. Because not every student's going to just naturally go to the school counselor, even if it's there. You need teachers who know when potentially to intervene or how to help out themselves. So I think that's a great idea. Next, despite heroic efforts, so they want to do through initiatives like extended day and or years, summer programming, year-round schooling, and intensive tutoring, we need to provide additional core academic enrichment and social opportunities for our students, as well as planning and collaboration time for our educators. Yeah, this is so true. I think the fundamental way we structure the school year is flawed. And especially when we're going to have a lot of kids, we're going to have a little bit of a learning gap because of the disruption from in-person schooling. It becomes pretty clear to me that you need to provide supplementary education opportunities. And now, obviously, you want these things to be available even during non-COVID recovery times too. And so the idea of extending the day so that it matches the same work schedule as most adults out there makes a lot of sense. It saves a lot of parents' time on childcare costs. Likewise, making sure that there's summer programming so that people don't have to go pay for additional things like camp that aren't even necessarily educational all the time. It's a different kind of socialization education sometimes. But as well, we need to be doing things like, frankly, taking out the summer break potentially altogether and just doing more breaks throughout the year. Like basically having every 3 weeks, you can have maybe a week off instead. Maybe sometimes you can even have a couple weeks off. So you still have a nice little break. But the idea of having several months off is a way we have a lot of kids cause a big gap in their education because they just forget a lot of stuff because of these big gaps. So I love the idea of trying to be flexible with the school schedule. And I think, frankly, these things can make it so that maybe we could even move to something like a traditional 4-day work week for a lot of people. Because if we do schooling all year round and we have more frequent breaks and we now take out these big long breaks, maybe we can exchange it for having our Fridays off. And because of that, maybe we have less excuses from certain communities for needing private school because now public school accommodates their need for Fridays off. I'm thinking particularly of the Jewish community in my own area. So there's a lot of need to rethink how we do time management in this country, when we work, when we educate kids. So I like that this is a focus and he wants to reimagine the school process. I think that's a really important goal. Next, Education Recovery Corps could provide supplemental learning and social emotional support while offering immediate employment in their own communities for CUNY students and graduates. I love this. This is the basic premise of so much of how we do universal basic services. This is just for education basically right now. It's saying that, hey, you come out of our CUNY system, you need a job, we got you. You're going to take this opportunity to go help educate other kids right now because they need help getting themselves back on track from this COVID period of time where they fell behind a little bit potentially on their own schooling. So I love this idea of almost like a mentorship and a semi-jobs guarantee program in a way. I think this is how you basically administer most universal basic services in the future. This learning disruption. Okay, so it's a partnership with CBOs, families, and schools. We need a citywide effort to communicate and re-engage these families and students and double down on our support for those entering key transition in the next year with a parallel effort at the CUNY level. So this is again like it's educating people of the process. It's kind of like when you get separated from the natural flow, you can sometimes get disrupted and just stop using it altogether. And so in this case, this is just, I think, also saying like, hey, we got to be reaching out and communicating to people to know that these things are available. So we got to invest in the basic communication effort. Then he wants to say invest in student success, provide grants to schools working with outside partners such as nonprofits or CUNY to accelerate learning for all students with a focus on students who have been left furthest behind, students with disabilities, homeless students, multilingual students, and students of color. So this is, again, improving access in our schooling and working with nonprofit groups to really help this because they have probably more experience trying to address this problem currently than even the public school system has. So I like this. This is just kind of like getting some counseling and investing in making sure that our schools are accessible to everyone. Yeah, like as much as we want to be making things equal in society, some things need equity. Education is one of those. Not everyone learns the same. Not everyone has the same capability to learn just through auditory means. Some people need in-person demonstration. You need to teach to the individual student. And so some students, as he lists here, they have greater needs in terms of how they can really be able to kind of get on track to be able to have their own success and contribute to the rest of the community over time. This is one of those things where we really grow as a society when we support our own and get them back on their feet. And education is a point where equity is often more important than equality sometimes. Other programs you might have a little bit of more of a need for equality, but this is one where I think equity actually makes some sense. Okay, so reimagining means not just reverting to our pre-COVID normal, but creating schools that center the needs and experiences of students historically marginalized and underserved and foster holistic skills and development for all students. We must work with educators, families, experts in the field of equity, and the science of learning and community-based organizations to lead with a vision for schools that cultivate students with multiple identities, foster physical and mental wellness, support social and emotional development, and develops their cognitive and academic skills. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a little vague, but it's good priorities. Like, it's just like, have it be a little bit more tailored to who the person is. Make sure that it's fostering general skills for maintaining your health and that you understand how to socialize with others and handle issues when they arise and how to critically think. I think those are all important, but it's a little vague. Okay, so now these are a little bit more specific. So next, he wants to remove police from schools, starting with schools that employ multiple school resource officers. And he wants to reinvest in positivity, prevention, relationships, and response coordinators. And then SROs will be supported in the transitioning. I think this makes a lot of sense. This is just trying to get out a certain level of force out of our schools and a certain mindset of almost like doomed to criminality, that you're constantly being watched by police officers. Like, we never needed that. We had our own school resource officers. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't be properly prepared to protect kids, but I think there's a different level of response needed. We don't have to have police officers, which might escalate to people going straight to juvie when things happen. Like, we should try and have people who can just settle things down and allows us to not have such a potentially life-altering course for these students. And I need to know more about like specifically what these people do, the positivity, prevention, relationships, and response coordinators. But it sounds like a generally positive thing. I mean, it's positive. Like, it says positive. Like, I mean, that's classic, like, potentially name redirects. So I don't know enough about them and their effectiveness, but I like the idea of being, positive. I like the idea of prevention. I like the idea of building relationships with the kids and knowing how to respond when stuff happens, but I have no idea what they actually do. So I'll admit my ignorance there. Next, he wants to eliminate metal detectors on campus arrests and handcuffing. Yeah, again, this is just like, I just feel like we should not be criminalizing kids. That you can kind of have a little bit more of almost a level of trust. Like, I feel like there's a level of almost as I said before, it's like it's dooming people to a life of criminalization, because it's like you have these reminders that is what it's almost expected of you. Like, your schools are the ones with these metal detectors and police officers and kids getting handcuffed, and other schools aren't. And so I don't know. Like, I would want to know what this is, I think, why he says here, except in extremely limited circumstances where student and educator safety is actually and immediately in danger. Like, that's what I was actually going to bring up. Like, if there are threats to the school, like, you should be able to implement safety measures. Like, you don't want to, like, say, yeah, we're going to never use metal detectors. And then, like, you get a threat and it's like, okay, well, sorry, we got to just trust people now, even though there's a credible threat. So, yeah, I think in certain circumstances, yes, you can still keep them, but we want to stop criminalizing kids, in my opinion. Next, finally, we must tackle unfair disciplinary practices. Yeah, I mean, this is, again, part of the equity plan. He's saying, like, oftentimes there can be potential discrimination in how discipline is rewarded, in, like, detention or other forms of punishment, like suspensions. And frankly, it's not just like communities of color. Sometimes it's like people with certain, mental health issues, or neurodevelopmental disorders, or different neurodiversity. Like, people don't all respond the same. And so educators sometimes can punish people indiscriminately. So this is basically saying, like, teaching alternatives, like, to things like suspension that deprive children of opportunity. Yeah, like, that's one of those that I've never found great. Like, a lot of the time suspension is like, I don't want to learn. So what do? They suspend the kid and say, nope, you don't have to learn. So what does that do? It almost is like a reward sometimes. And it's denying them of an education. We have to take a different approach there. He doesn't lay out specifically what that alternative is, but I think it's a good idea to look towards other disciplinary measures. Yeah, and look towards how it's administered too, like, to make sure that it's fair. To address this, senior leadership position? Yeah, I mean, they always love to have new deputy mayors. Comprehensive plan for students in temporary housing. Yeah, this reminds me of whose plan was it? I think this was part of, like, was it Ray's plan? I think it was part of Ray's plan from yesterday. It was either Ray's or it was Maya Wiley's. It was one of those two people. They had this plan where it was basically, you had a dedicated educational system specifically focused by, like, it's a supportive model where you basically have educational resources really focused to people who are in kind of temporary housing situations. It doesn't always mean shelters per se. It could be like foster care too, to make sure that people in those situations are getting tailored support, so that they're not constantly bouncing around school systems and support systems too. You want to try and have some level of stability for some of these people. Next, even as we move to housing rather than shelter-based system for addressing homelessness, schooling must be consistently considered in shelter placements. Yeah, I mean, this again, as I just said, having something that's targeted to these communities in temporary living environments. We have to maintain that support until we get fully everyone into the proper permanent housing situations. Next, they want to do prioritization for community school efforts or other wraparound models. Students in temporary housing should have access to trained staff. Yep. Make sure that our schools are doing more than just education, but are providing things like, frankly, like school lunch and mental health services and all sorts of things, is like after school programs. They should be having these wraparound interventionary measures. Yeah. Uh, while the current administration made progress by adding social work staff to shelters, they have to hire 150 new social workers. Sure, that's fine. The Department of Education must also develop a multi-tiered support system in schools for foster, homeless, and support. Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what I was saying before. Just having some targeting to this. And as I said at the beginning of this, and as you can tell from the length of this stream already at 41 minutes and only going through one policy platform, Shaun has like the most detail in his platform, by far, like as of any of the candidates I've seen. So I mean, it's either him or it's maybe Eric Adams. Yang's kind of close in competitiveness, but I don't know. I think these guys go into larger depth of what's needed in each of these areas. Um, and I can appreciate that. I like Yang's leadership, and some of his policies that Shaun doesn't have, but I will not discredit Shaun for his lack of detail. He has a lot of detail. And yeah, again, this is like very just making sure that we have targeting. So this is again special education and others with disability, um, language access, making sure that we have everyone having the digital devices they need, as well as the broadband internet needed to make sure that they can use them. Let's see. So they're going to partner for digital services and tap CBOs to better reach immigrant and low income families who may need additional support to afford, navigate, and access new tools. Okay, yeah. So this is again, you got to make sure people are properly educated on how to use this stuff and getting it set up and knowing that these things are available. I like that he has that as a consistent theme, like making sure that we are properly communicating to make sure people know that these things are available. Because it doesn't matter if it's available if people aren't using it because they don't know to use it. Let's see. So he wants to curate expertly constructed remote instruction, can engage many more students in enrichment classes, accelerated learning opportunities, and advanced placement courses, while also allowing students to learn in integrated learning environments to go beyond their school buildings. So this is kind of like, hey, let's get some general education resources together that everyone can access and really learn from, like the advanced placement courses, and also give, access to other resources that are beyond AP courses that are kind of in other learning environments around around the city. So, I mean, that's an interesting model. It's just kind of like a centralized learning hub, which is kind of cool. And then they're going to work with the city's technology sector to innovate around educational equity. I guess this is just adding more technology to the schools and getting advice. I mean, it's not a bad idea. Again, there's a lot of more specifics that would be needed to know there, but I don't mind it. We should be increasing the quality of the technology in our schools and doing it in an equitable manner. Okay, so next he wants to improve educator diversity. Okay. Really? They want to get teachers of color up to 65 and 70%? I mean, okay. I usually don't like the idea of quotas for how much you got to put into the seats. Like, we should make sure they're being considered more, that they have more access to becoming teachers, that they're getting more, frankly, interview opportunities, that there isn't discrimination happening. But I usually don't like this idea of having a targeted amount that each school has to hire between. So building on the programs like NYC Men Teach to develop additional pipelines and ensure that our educators reflect the diversity. Let me read through more. What is he specifically saying? So he says the target goal by investing in hiring, preparing, and retaining diverse educators, building on the programs like that, to develop additional pipelines and ensure that our educators reflect the diversity of the young people they serve, as well as the languages they speak, and ensuring a system-wide focus on transparency around educator diversity. This is important for our students, but also for economic empowerment in our communities. Educator jobs are strong pathways to the middle class. I mean, this is true. And I mean, there are definitely studies also that show that there is better results usually coming from people who have similar experience and identity factors to you, helping you learn often better. So I can see this. I just think that the specific way of doing a quota doesn't make it the best way. I like the goal, just not the necessarily specific there. In terms of preparation, early exposure program and scaffolded pathways to teaching for high school and college students, pathways for other educators who are more likely to be of color to become classroom educators or classroom teachers. So basically, they want to just increase the ways to help get people connected to becoming involved in their local community, basically in these different types of roles, like in CBOs and as paraprofessionals and childhood educators, like reaching out to these communities to make sure that they get into these jobs that kind of stay within the community and are middle class jobs. That makes a lot of sense. High school teacher program. Wait, so it's yeah, I mean, so it's just kind of developing a pipeline model that keeps kids locally in their school systems as their own educators. That's a great idea in general, in my opinion. Kind of keeps a nice cultural tie too to the community. Um, to have the generational teacher model, basically. So the next, they basically say we got to use uh, basically supportive environments for all educators. So it's not just supporting schools, but it's supporting teachers, and especially we got to support teachers of color. And we got to make sure that we can retain these people by making sure that we're paying them properly in our public school system. Um, yeah, so basically, they're just trying to say that we have to establish a better system for teachers, frankly, that supports them better, and that'll in turn help communities of color that generally leave the profession faster. Finally, we must build on the work the city council has done, making it more accessible, actionable data on educator diversity at every level, including data on how educators of color experience the workplace. Yeah, I mean, we can have the data. I don't mind having the data. It just depends on how it sometimes gets used, but I will never object to the data. Establish a school diversity and integration office within the Department of Education. Okay. What is it going to do? Add diversity, integration, and inclusion metrics. So these are the people who are going to get the data, put all the data together, and be able to produce reports for the data. Again, I don't mind a data team. An early effort to expand the number of seats for students in intentionally diverse, inclusive, and high-quality schools. Again, this is one where it'd be like, I would just rather it be kind of high-quality schools and, frankly, in areas that need investment, like that have like quality transit and infrastructure around it, that have the business connections that you were looking for to do these kind of job programs, that frankly are more low income areas too. I hope that's kind of what they mean in this kind of overall. Um, so families must play a major role in the establishment of new schools. I mean, yeah, this is just kind of part of comprehensive planning that should be done. And then investing in getting community level plans back on track and fund additional community integration plans with the goal of making the incoming elementary, middle, and high school classes across all NYC districts representative of their district's populations by 2025. Sure, I mean, again, this is part of the whole idea he's been going for. I don't have to keep beating the bush here. Um, I don't know if I want it to be quota per se, but we should be having people be tracked and making sure we have equal opportunity to get in there. At the middle school level, make permanent the current administration's temporary elimination of screens. Um, So they want to just go to complete open lottery. I mean, I don't like that approach because, in my opinion, you should have students who are generally along similar levels of competency. That way, teachers don't have to teach such a wide bounds of classrooms, and you don't have to have as many classrooms of as many bounds in a single school. Obviously, you want to provide proportional funding across the schools, but I don't think we should be eliminating screening completely from our schools permanently. I could see doing that as a temporary measure because of COVID and the disruption we've had in our education system, and some people not being able to take the screens as easily now because the testing environments are harder to administer. I get that, but I don't think that should be a permanent move. Place affirmative pro-equity district-wide policies at the middle school level, like the weighted lottery approach. A weighted lottery model can promote more representative in distributions of students from low-income households, multilingual learners, students in temporary housing, and or students with disabilities in all the schools in a district. In addition, as with high school enrollment, we would encourage districts to ensure middle school enrollment is not limited by residential segregation, by limiting seats reserved for students within zones and opening up more seats for other students in the district and or from historically underrepresented groups in neighboring districts through a weighted lottery. Again, this is like trying to make it so that kids have to go into other people's school districts sometimes, and that not having this be necessarily the students being at a similar caliber to be able to effectively teach. And it's not necessarily the first part. Like if you're making the schools more equal across the board, like if you're doing that funding, why is this approach needed? Why can't schools have their own screening process of what level they're trying to teach at? I'm not sure if I agree with this lottery-based approach from Donovan. They want to have an elimination of geographic priorities, recently announced by the de Blasio administration, to continue. Reform and improve the high school admission system so that entrance criteria are fair and transparent and include specific mechanisms such as weighted lotteries to ensure all high schools, and especially our highest performing high schools, are more representative of students from all demographic groups. Again, it's the same point. It's just, it depends on whether or not you value having more admission criteria and how you think a student body should have kind of an equal caliber of education competency versus having it just be more diversity within it on certain factors. There should be a balance of different things, obviously. You don't want to have it just be only based off tests, because those usually just reward people of means who perform better on those tests. You want to have a holistic review, but I disagree on the idea of not having just a screening process. And obviously, you don't want it to be, again, segregated. Like if there's clear instances of that, you need to have course correction. And maybe you make the surveys more blind so you don't have the names on it. But again, I think that there is merit to having some level of screening to make sure that kids are in the classroom are at similar competency level. So this again, making schools more bilingual. And again, I can agree with that. And means making more programs for language. I think that's going to be increasingly a needed skill. And it's just a nice critical thinking skill too. Its language ability is just a very useful thing. So it's not even necessarily what specific language you choose. It's almost a way of thinking too that it teaches people. Make the curriculum more responsive. And then, okay, so now we're up to the part of his plan where he wants to expand it to everything. So he wants to make the following changes. So he wants to build off the success of universal pre-K, partner with CUNY in high school and beyond to ensure students are on the pathway to sustainable jobs. Okay. So this is, again, make sure that things are better coordinated so that they're working with the Department of Education, the Department of Health, and community-based organizations to make sure that these groups are opening safely and operating safely. Next, he wants to make sure the early childhood classrooms are integrated. So he wants to work with ways to encourage that integration. Again, I feel like a universal childcare would help that a lot. Like a lot of it is the cost. Like that's why you mentioned here, I guess, a Head Start program. But let's see. Establish shared service organizations that provide administrative and other professional support. Yep. Invest in our early childhood workforce. Okay. Again, this kind of is redundant to some of the other things because he could have just said it for both college and primary and this. It's all the same. It's hire more. It's making sure that these things are having services at them for the kids. It's a little redundant. And again, investing in literacy programs. He already had that stuff. Then it's okay, connecting high schools to high-paying jobs. Sure. Conversations with students suggest that in high school that serve higher income communities, this shift is already well underway. These schools frame graduation as necessary, but partial measure of success. Students understand that they are on a path that extends beyond high school, and high schools provide opportunities to their students that help them figure out where they're going. Students that attend high schools that serve lower income communities, on the other hand, report a narrower focus on graduation and opportunities for broader exposure that are targeted rather than universal. Ensuring that every student has these opportunities is embedded in the high school experience. Yeah, so this is connecting people with internships. And so it's making sure that at least one paid job, apprenticeship, or internship opportunity that connects people to a meaningful career path to every high school student by 2026. That's a bold goal. I like the goal, though. But this is basically just saying, like, by the year 2026, we should have a guarantee that anyone who wants work experience as a young adult in high school should be able to get it. And not technically a young adult. This is high school. So an older teenager, like 16 and up, I'm assuming is what he means. He wants to ensure that at least 60% of students are able to obtain college credit while in high school, with a focus on expanding opportunities for historically underserved populations and neighborhoods. I've always found it interesting how much we've kind of gotten to this focus on, like, let's make people get college credit while they're in high school. Doesn't that seem weird to you? Like, let's teach college in high school. Then what's the point of college? Why not just teach in high school and get people ready out of high school? Like, the idea of teaching college credit in high school is just kind of the excuse because you don't want to make college free. So you're trying to save them some cost by saying, oh, you already learned that, you don't have to do it again. I always find that thing just a little foolish, in my opinion, as a priority. Just teach good quality high school, get people ready to potentially work jobs out of high school. And if people want to go to college, let's help get them free community college experience so that they don't have to have a long, potentially private university experience or public university experience to specialize. Because, I don't think we need to be focusing on the college credit aspect. Next, establish and empower an intermediary. What? To partner with the DOE and CUNY workforce programs to employers and students and families to identify expand high quality programs. It's finding experiences and someone to work with these private groups to establish the employment experiences. And they're going to work with high growth sectors and pool public and private funding to dramatically increase these paid relevant internships, apprenticeships. So this is increasing job programs with public-private partnerships. It's a good idea. They want to double the size of the summer youth employment program. So this is, again, like, it's not like, again, a guarantee right away or anything like as a guarantee fully. It's just, again, doubling it. But this is a good idea. We should have more people to be able to get full-time, like, summer jobs. But I don't know. It kind of seems redundant with some of the other things he said before about being able to get everyone some job or internship by 2026. 60% of New York City high school graduates. He said that again. They want to add 15 new schools to the 20 existing early college high schools, locating them across the city in the areas of highest need, especially in community school districts where there isn't already an early college high school. Again, I find that just weird. Like, why can't we just have high school, have college, teach both at a good level, and say high school should actually have you be prepared to do most jobs. And then college is a thing for you to continue learning and specialize potentially into some other jobs if you so choose. And then master's degree is oh, you really need to specialize. So it's not just doing an understanding of biology, but now you're becoming a doctor, a real specialization. I know that's not a master's, that's a different degree, an MD. But my point being is that's what you have the graduated professional degrees become. But I digress. I think it ends up being very similar. It's just how do you phrase it? Again, this is just saying let's do better education earlier, which is, again, good at the end of the day. Starting high school strong, have a high school graduation plan. This is basically helping each ninth grader have a plan and have counselors essentially in their district. It's a good program. Helps keep people focused. This is helping get people into college. They want to do accelerated programs because they think that's a good way to reduce people dropping out of college. I disagree. I think it's just the cost, and you might not even need the extra college. If we do our high schools right and we are teaching the proper life skills and frankly, help people start specializing a little bit earlier so they don't have to use their junior and senior year doing, again, the same general education curriculum, I think we can get a much cheaper and more effective education system. And that people should have access to go to college and have the funds to go to college and choose that if they would like as an adult. But let's make sure that kids have quality education. Okay, and so he's saying we can't cut into these things even in good times. Sure, that makes sense. Reach out to students who stopped out or delayed enrollment in CUNY during the pandemic, especially community college students, and encourage them to restart their educational plans. A new CUNY Learning Center for the 21st century, and establish a program that enlists retired professionals to mentor high school and college students. Yeah, I mean, this is just, again, creating new areas for people to kind of connect and manage these internship services and kind of get people professionally prepared. And then also having mentorship programs. This is something that we have at a lot of our colleges in the public system. This is just kind of bringing the system earlier. And I think that makes a ton of sense. I mean, this is obviously saying it's CUNY, but it's now saying we should bring these services to our high schools as well. So I love that. And then finally, invest in New York City libraries as neighborhood learning assets. Open all libraries in all neighborhoods 7 days a week. Supporting libraries in NYCHA communities, immigrant neighborhoods, communities of color. Yeah, we should have libraries everywhere. This is a basic service. You're going to see this when we do our episode on information, but libraries are a basic service that all communities should have. You could debate on how many and how spacious it should be and how much should be available in each library. Granted, I give you that. But the basic idea that people have a standard of some level of information they should have makes a ton of sense. And so library services are very important as a way of not just, managing people and having books, but, being able to provide education to the community, sometimes providing computers to people who don't have it and connection to the internet. There's a lot of things that can be administered through the library system. So they're going through that, learning and opportunities like literacy programs and, infrastructure development through innovative revenue and partnership models. I don't know what that means. So this is like how they want to make money to finance the libraries better. So including reserving library space for commercial use as long as it doesn't intrude on the library's community building and educational functions. Yeah, this is, again, using the building as a little bit more of a flexible space. And again, that all depends on how it's administered. And if it keeps to that promise, it's a good idea. We should use government property to generate revenue when we can. Okay, that's his education plan. Everyone, that was a very long breakdown. So we're going to have to be doing another video at another point for Shaun Donovan. We're going to have to break his plan out into multiple days because we're not going to go through another plan that's going to take an hour. Kudos to Shaun making us have to do multiple parts. But please do let us know if you have any questions. We're going to be coming back again at 2 p.m. to do the climate page for him. So we're going to be having a little bit of a push out of some of our other policy platforms. So everyone tune in the future and you will see our future content on some of the other candidates. And you're going to see part 2 tomorrow of Shaun Donovan on climate. So thank you all for tuning in today. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And as always, I hope you stay basic.